Andrew Plitt here with andrewplitt.com. In this video, we're continuing the silk reeling series that we started quite a while ago. And this is the first video that's actually going to show you exercises that you can do at home. And it will also have a follow-along portion, so you can follow along with the exercise and get a feel for what it's like to practice this on your own. A big thank you to all the supporting members out there who are supporting this channel and helping make sure that videos like this continue to be made available. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to say about the exercise we're going to do in this video is that, as far as I know, this is not a traditional exercise that's normally taught as a part of silk reeling. This is something that I came up with to help people understand what's going on with the legs when someone's practicing silk reeling or practicing Tai Chi with silk reeling in it. Typically, the first exercise you learn for silk reeling involves the whole body moving. So it's the legs moving, it's arms moving, it's the torso moving, everything's moving together. And ideally, that is where you want to end up with your silk reeling, but it's not necessarily where you want to start with silk reeling if you're wanting to take it a piece at a time and really understand the components of it. Because when you do it that way, there's a lot of things to focus on at one time, a lot of moving parts all moving at the same time and needing to be coordinated. And I find that's kind of a difficult thing for beginners especially to do, is find that coordination. And I found that if you break things down into smaller pieces, it makes it much easier to learn. So today we're just learning a basic piece of how to practice silk reeling, and it has completely to do with the legs. We're only focusing on one leg at a time. So this should be pretty straightforward, and it should be something that will really help you grasp what your leg should be doing as you're practicing silk reeling as we get into more complex movements in the future. Now, before we get into the exercise, if you have not seen the previous videos in this series, I highly recommend that you go back and watch them so you have a more solid conceptual framework of what your body is doing and what's happening in your body as we do these exercises. Of course, you can do these exercises on their own without having a deeper understanding of what's going on with these exercises. But I think when you do that, you kind of lose a really important aspect of your silk reeling training, and it just becomes mirroring motions that someone else is doing rather than having a good understanding of what should be going on inside your body. So the first part of this exercise is learning rotation with the leg. And as we talked about in previous videos, when you're rotating the leg, you're rotating from the hip joint. You're not rotating at the knee, you're not rotating at the ankle. Those are staying aligned, and the rotation's coming from the hip. That way you don't put excess strain on your knees or your ankles. As you're doing motions, rotation comes from the hip. So the first thing that you want to do is just set your heel on the floor and do that. Rotate out from the hip, making sure that you're not twisting at the knee. You're rotating from the hip joint, and then rotate in from the hip joint. So your toe is going away from your center line, and it's coming in toward your center line. That's the kind of rotation that's going through your leg. The whole leg's moving together from the hip. Now what you can do is pick your foot up and rotate. Same idea, outward rotation, inward rotation. And in previous videos, I did use specific terminology for the type of rotation that you're doing in silk reeling. From now on, I'm just going to refer to it mainly as outward rotation and inward rotation, just to keep things simple. Now, the nice thing about saying outward and inward rotation is the direction that the leg is turning, or that the toes are turning, tells you whether it's an inward or outward rotation. So if my toes are going away from center line, that's an outward rotation. If the toes are coming in towards center line, that's an inward rotation. So we're going to do that a few times with one leg. Outward rotation, make sure all the joints are aligned and you're rotating from the hip. Inward rotation, everything turns in from the hip. Outward rotation from the hip, inward rotation from the hip. Switch legs, try it out on the other side. Start with your heel on the ground, rotate in, rotate out. Keep the knee aligned, keep the ankle aligned, and rotate from the hip, just in and out. Once you have a feel for that, you're going to shift all your weight to your other leg, and you're going to rotate that leg in the air. So inward rotation, toes come in toward your center line. Outward rotation, toes go out. Joints are aligned, rotation from the hip, just like before. So that's very simple, it's very straightforward, and it gives you an idea of the rotation that's happening with the leg. Let's do this in a weight-bearing exercise so that it's not just you rotating your leg in space and you get a feeling for how that connects to the rest of the body's motion. So now what we're going to be doing is rotating the leg that's weight-bearing. So the other foot is going to come off the floor, or it's going to gently touch the floor if you need it there for balance. Of course, if you're doing this, any motion that you're standing on one foot, feel free to hold on to something if you need that extra support for balance. Right now what we're working on is not balance training. What we're working on is silk reeling. So if you need to do something to support your balance so you can find the rotation and the motion of the body, that's totally fine. And then as your balance improves, you can get rid of those supports and do the silk reeling while working on balance. But for right now, focus on the silk reeling motion. So all the structural components that we've talked about in previous videos, also what we talked about in the standing post Qigong instruction series, those structural alignments apply here. That's why we practice that in Zhuang or standing post Qigong, so we can learn those things and then apply them when we're moving. So you want to make sure the weight's distributed correctly on the foot. If you don't know what that is, go back to previous videos. You want to make sure your knees aligned. You want to make sure that your hips are where the rotation is, as we talked before. You want to make sure there's expansion through the spine, the chin is tucked. All of those things that we've discussed before need to be in place for this exercise. And for this exercise, what we're going to do is point the foot straight forward. Remember, rotation comes from the hip. You're going to bend the knee and sit down on that leg, aligning the weight and distributing it properly on the bottom of the foot. What we're going to do is focus on that same closing of the hip and opening of the hip, or rotating in of the leg and rotating out of the leg. Now notice the foot staying stationary. What we were doing before, the foot was the thing that was moving, right? This is our root to the ground, so it can't be slipping and sliding all over the place. It's solidly attached to the ground, and its attachment to the ground is what allows us to manipulate what's going on with the rest of our bodies. So we attach that foot to the ground, but we can do those same rotations at the hip and see how it's turning the rest of my body when I'm moving this hip joint. So you can pick up that foot if you want to, or you can leave it touching the floor, and you're going to root down into that leg. You're going to open. As you open, you expand the leg, so you have an outward rotation of the foot, but since the foot is stationary, my body's being pushed that way. So the rotation's like this. So it rotates down this way. Here, I expand the leg. Don't lock out the knee, just expand. From here, we're going to close the hip joint. We're going to rotate inward with the foot. That's going to pull the body back in this direction. So you draw in and close. Expand out and open. Draw in and close. Now as you do this, remember the motion's coming from the lower dantian. If you don't know what that means, again, previous videos. So from the lower dantian, what you're doing is you're expanding down through the leg into the floor, and as you're doing that, you're rotating down into the floor. That's turning the body away from the direction that it was facing before. So I'm turning to my left as my right foot rotates to my right side. So the right foot is doing this, but because it's stuck to the floor, it's making my body do this. That's your expansion. Lower dantian, down through the leg, expanding, and I turn. The other thing is drawing up from the ground toward the lower dantian. So you're pulling up from the ground, and that pulling up is what draws in. So it draws the bottom of the foot up. At the bubbling well point, you draw that energy up through the foot, in toward the lower dantian, and that brings this together. So you have pulling this way, from up here and down here, pulling like this. That's drawing the body in, lower dantian being drawn, or the ground being drawn up toward the lower dantian. From here, the lower dantian expands and opens, and as it does that, the body opens, right? Rotation at the hip. And we can do the same thing on the other side, same concept. Instead of the foot being the thing that turns in and out, the foot's planted on the floor, and its rotation turns the body, not at the knee, not at the ankle, at the hip. So if I'm going to expand out and open, my foot would have been opening out to the left. It's anchored, so it's pushing my body in this direction, right? Going opposite directions. Instead of this being the opposite direction, it's this being the opposite direction.